Hello and welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes. I've got a great guest lined up for you today. His name is Neil Clauson. He's the regional CISO at Mimecast. Now, in the age of rampant digitalization, the World Economic Forum's 2023 Global Risk Report recently highlighted cyber risk as one of the top 10 global risks. And this has escalated the importance of cybersecurity to a board-level topic, and quite rightly so, given the imminent SEC cyber regulations too. So today, I've invited Neil Clauson, the regional CISO at Mimecast, onto the podcast. Neil is here today to shed light on how CISOs can effectively communicate these cyber risks to the board and the C-suite, ultimately emphasising the critical connection between business risk and cyber risk. And he's going to share his insights today on the need to avoid technical jargon, the importance of focusing on why cyber attacks happen rather than how, and also how to align cyber risk with overall business risk. So we're going to dive into all this and also some of the strategies that CISOs can employ to ensure they're not turning every incident into a crisis and are instead accurately quantifying the risk at hand. So whether you are a cybersecurity professional seeking to communicate better with your C-suite or a board member striving to better understand cyber threats, we've got something for everyone today. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Boston, where Neil is waiting to speak to Neil. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Neil. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, folks. I'm Neil Clauson. I am a security practitioner. I've been doing so for most of my life in my career. It's a passion, and I've worked in a variety of organizations and verticals: finance, healthcare, manufacturing, and security products. And I love it, and I love sharing the knowledge and experiences I've had with other folks because I've had great folks share the same with me.
Well, it's a huge pleasure to have you on the podcast. So much I want to talk to you around, especially around the ever-trending topic of cybersecurity. And before you came on the podcast today, I was reading that the World Economic Forum's 2023 Global Risk Report has ranked cyber risk among the top 10 global risks, which is probably not too much of a surprise for business leaders and people listening around the world. But can you explain why this is now a board-level topic and why it's important for CISOs to communicate these risks to the board? Because I think for a long time there was a bit of confusion from that board level and they didn't really see the value in cybersecurity, but thankfully that's changed. So can you expand on that for me?
Yeah, I mean, sure. In the old days, so 5 years ago, cyber risk was kind of, it was a back of the house thing. I like using restaurant analogies, right? Like your chefs might be having problems, but it didn't really impact the front of the house. But now cyber risk is financial risk. It's reputational risk, and that directly translates to company risk. Anything that's going to have a disruptive impact on that firm, the board has their due diligence, their requirements to ensure that the controls are in place, that the people, process, and technology are there, right? So it's they're looking to see, can the security team demonstrate that they fully understand their threat environment, that they understand the efficacy of the controls, and that they have the capabilities and capacity to kind of prevent that business-related impact, right? So it's their focus on the instability to the org, and cybersecurity now, as can't go a day without seeing another example of how a business was significantly disrupted due to a cyber attack.
And one of the reasons I launched this podcast way back in 2015 was when I was in the IT world. I was in all those stakeholder meetings, and as soon as the IT person opened their mouth, it seemed to be just lots of acronyms, and people from around the business had no idea what anyone was talking about. So I started this podcast to try and put it in a language everyone can understand. And in a world increasingly driven by digital technology, I'm curious, how can CISOs better communicate to mid to long-term risk with cyber threats present without resorting to jargon and acronyms? Is there any way you could provide a simplified example of such a communication? Does it exist?
Yeah, I mean, jargon to a certain degree is an in versus out culture. Like if you know the jargon, then you're in. So I reminded of a movie from a while ago, Good Morning Vietnam, right? With the late, great Robin Williams, who's CEO, commanding officer, comes in and spouts a bunch of jargon, and he replies back, "Excuse me, sir, considering that the VIP is such a VIP, shouldn't we put his PC on the QT? Otherwise, the VC might make us MIA and we'll be put on KP," right? So, and I feel like that's, right? That's us when we're speaking to each other. But when you're speaking to the board, it's the business jargon. So they have their own language. And my suggestion is learn what that is. And that is really, to me, following the money, speaking in terms of business. So I have my MBA, but you don't really need it. It's really just looking at the 10K or looking at how the business is making money in terms of annual recurring revenue or downsell or forecast, and then speaking about how those cybersecurity incidents will have an impact on those things, right? And so I think in terms of like crawl, walk, run, or good, better, best, and how can folks on the call just start with this process? And I like the idea of talking to your CFO and just say, on a scale of 1 to 5, what's your 5? Is it losing $1 million or 10 million or 100 million? So then as you start to level set with like the CMO, how many customers do we have to lose for it to be a 5 incident due to a cybersecurity incident? And so once you start to get that understanding and what's important to them, then you can frame, well, this a cybersecurity incident that we would be subject to because we have the old technology or whatever it is. Our number one customer or competitor just had the same thing happen to them, and they lost. To you, CFO, was a 4. What should we do about it, right? So I think it's implementing that risk-focused culture and helping it speak in those clear terms. I'm also, we'll talk more about the FAIR, factor analysis of information risk, and talking about like loss exceedance curves. So how can we put those metrics and those facts in front and get it out of the back of the house esoteric, dark magic, and really talk about the business and profit and loss and churn and customer impact type of things.
It's so important right now. And for any business leader that's listening to our conversation outside of cyber and tech, could you speak a little around the benefits of investing in top-tier solutions and how they can help mitigate cyber threats? And also, of course, how CISOs can effectively better link cyber threats to business outcomes in their communication with the board, because that is the language that they ultimately understand, right?
Right, yeah, sure. I mean, I think everybody understands top-tier, like what's a top tier car, or whatever the outside thing is. But internally, what does it mean to be top tier from a security perspective, a product perspective? I kind of feel like that's a secondary consideration to defense and depth and like good solid architecture. Often the companies that are saying they're top, the research companies that are saying company X is top tier, they often get it wrong because there's a lot going on. So I think it depends on what's right for you, what's right for your environment and your particular threat profiles. But in the end, top tier is something that's not just a technology issue. It's something that has the capabilities that match the requirements, something that's easy to test and deploy, easy to operationalize and maintain. Lots of technology just becomes shelfware, right? Because it's hard to get those outcomes. And so you have to adapt and have to have technology that integrates. And I'm a huge fan. For a long time, all those top tier solutions only worked with themselves, and the industry is enlightened, and those ecosystem integrations, those API to API connections that allow threat intelligence to be cross-pollinated, to have a detection on one platform get pushed over to another platform for remediation. So to me, those are the things that when I'm speaking to the leadership and speaking to the board, I have the capabilities and the capacity, the teams, the management around these solutions in order to effectively reduce the controls. And actually, so I think in terms of 4 main pillars of how, when CISOs or we're talking to the board, one is, how do I effectively quantify my risk and do that in a quantitative manner that the business responds to? Have I maximized all of my controls? Have I minimized my attack surface? And can I tell a good story around that? And if we can do those 4 things, then I think that we can, when we're going to the board, we're saying, hey, this control will help us, this solution will help us get those outcomes.
And I'm curious, when speaking with leadership teams and the board there, what advice do you offer in avoiding sleepwalking into things like blame culture by focusing on how an attack happened instead of concentrating on why it happened? And maybe provide an instance where this shift in focus could provide valuable insights to anyone listening too.
Right. So my last pillar, telling a good story, sometimes it's telling a good bad story, meaning by saying no to investing in this control, we had to say yes to being, potentially open to this breach. So I think both the how and the why are important. The how talks about, its relation to the controls you had deployed. Were they effective? I think in terms of the ways, the means, and the ends. So the how relates to the ways, right? Do I have all those architecture, the basic type threat intelligence, threat informed defense, And to me, so the ways is the why, and that is, do I have the right strategic design? Do I have a mature organization? Have I invested in people and talent? And do I have a governance and decision support aspect around this? So that to me is technology can change, and as we've seen many times, if technology fails, CISOs like swap it out, like put the right solution in. But in the end, we're trying to get buy-in and get visibility to that leadership for the overall program. And again, they have their due diligence, they have their fiduciary responsibility. So how can we better support their decision-making process for where to invest, where not to invest, to acquire cyber insurance, right? It's about risk transference, and how effective are we as security professionals doing job to kind of elevate those decision-making processes. And to me, that's why the how is, yes, sure, it's important, but the why of the big picture and where the program is going in that medium to long-term plan is where you start to get that buy-in and investment and ownership and accountability from that level of leadership.
And when I was doing a little research on you before you came on the podcast today, I learned that you're also passionate about aligning cyber risk with overall business risk. And I think that works perfectly. It brings it to life for the boardrooms there. So can you expand on how this helps in creating an integrated cybersecurity function, and equally how any CISO listening can successfully achieve this?
I mean, it's about security delivering on the promises that they've made to the business and that the business has made to its customers and stakeholders and board, right? So that's, again, I'll go back to understanding and doing things like business impact assessments, right? And so using our skills for understanding what's a failure scenario, right? Lots of people in the business have either never encountered it or don't know what to do. So I think that, for example, running a tabletop exercise, and not a technical one of, hey, which nerd knobs are you going to go turn if this event happens, right? But more in bringing it to the legal and the finance and the public relations and the customer support, saying, we just had a hypothetical incident that, again, maybe it just happened to our biggest competitor or our biggest customer. And getting those folks to help improve the decision-making process. I often say an incident is a surprise, but our response shouldn't be. And that's where I feel like actually now an incident shouldn't be a surprise, because you've using your skills, your network, your community in the security to understand and quantify your risk, and then elevate those to your leadership and going, this might happen to us. What are you going to do? And that also then helps you with cyber insurance premiums, because you can prove that you have that resiliency. You can prove that we are training like we fight and fighting like we train. And that goes a long way to elevating security, to say we're not just a back of the house, again, nerd knob turners. We are here to deliver on the promises that we've made and that you, the business, have made. So I think that's how I would approach this, is just stepping outside your comfort zone a little bit, not necessarily getting an MBA, but really just understanding where risk it would materially impact the business, and how can I elevate. I am not the final decision maker, right? I am not the gate. It's the business's decision to invest or not invest in technology or whatever, and then playing that out and accepting it. Like, there's a stoicism aspect, and as a side note, I highly recommend folks follow the Daily Stoic podcast, because it resonates with us as professionals. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to it, and that goes a long way for our own mental health, and as well as how we present ourselves to the business.
Nerd knobs, I absolutely love that. I'm going to be stealing that one from you.
Right. We love them, right? We love nerd knobs. It's just
And anyone that has walked into an IT department during a P1 incident while people are running around looking busy, phones ringing, stakeholders demanding updates, while ironically interrupting an investigation and troubleshooting, etc., will know that communication can play a big part in just easing people's concerns. So how should a CISO handle communication around a cyber incident, and how can they avoid turning every incident into a crisis, while equally ensuring the gravity of the situation is fully understood? Because it sounds simple, but it's such a tricky balance, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And I think I'm a big fan of tiering things, right? So identifying what your top tier, your tier one risks are, and then, prior to anything happening, quantifying what the risk scenarios are around that. Being able to, what we don't want to do is say, I told you so, right? Because that is what I'd call a resume generating event. But it's, I think it's about being, as a leader, cool, calm, and collected, having a longer term vision for the program and for the company, and being able to have gone through those tabletops, understood and quantifying those failure scenarios, and being able to just, I guess, run through it in a way that folks are prepared, and again, the tabletops and the instant response aspect, and doing things that get you forward thinking and preparing properly for that. I feel like that's how you do it. It's and I'd also say, for example, I recently did some improv training with about 8 other CISOs and friends of mine. And the concept is, when you're in front of the board, you have to be able to think on your feet, say yes, and if you can, bring a sense of humor to it, but support your fellow cast members, or your fellow, your folks that are also preparing to the board. So I feel like that is another soft skill that all security folks need to have, right? Is how can I communicate effectively and collaboratively?
Again, if we go back to the old days, there was a very much a reactive approach to cybersecurity, in much the same way as homeowners wait to be burgled before buying an alarm. And,
right.
So if we look back, I mean, we've progressed to a proactive approach to all things security. So are there any tactics that you could share for effectively framing cyber risk to the board so that they can accurately quantify it without necessarily requiring a breach to underline its urgency?
Right. I mean, that's how do we get people to understand that there's something amiss? So again, in terms of good, better, best, or qual rock run, right? Folks can start with just looking at there's a Sunil Yu. There's a thing called the Cyber Defense Matrix, and it's the NIST CSF: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. But it's a matrix where you blend that against your tools that you have in your environment to identify end users or applications or data or databases or network controls. So my first suggestion is just go map that out. Map out where you have controls and where you lack controls. And I did that at one org, and we realized we had nothing protecting our databases, but we had a significant amount of sensitive data there. So there's lots of ways to do that without spending any money. There's the NIST CSF, the maturity models. There's other ways and lots of great frameworks to use. I would say, as you mature as a program, using the factor analysis of information risk, it is a more thoughtful way to look at likelihood versus impact and the factors that lead into likelihood, primary loss events, secondary loss events. Fair-U, there's free tools for this to do, and you don't need to be specific. You can say, I have a range. And by doing that, you're really starting to articulate what's called a loss exceedance curve. So if you can go to the board and say, we are X% likely to have Y dollars of loss in the next year, then you can, and this is how we compare to our peers, then you can really start getting funding and getting the quantitative alignment. Right. And so having those failure scenarios, having the diverse inputs, using lots of different types of simulations, and you can do this in Excel, right? You don't have to go and acquire an expensive tool. There's lots of different ways to understand that and to be able to both estimate and kind of forecast what the likelihood is with some degree of assurance.
And the business and tech landscape has been transformed in the last 3 years alone. There's now an expectation to work on any network, any device, any location, at any time. There's also a huge expectation of hybrid working. 2023 has seen most businesses blindsided by Gen AI. I think we can expect a lot more changes on the horizon. So looking forward, how do you envision the role of a CISO in board-level decision-making and risk management as cyber threats equally continue to evolve too?
I think it's becoming more aligned and being able to have. I feel like there's different types of CISOs, and we might have some CISOs that are more evangelist focused, that are public facing, or more that are technical and compliance focused. But I feel like I love this field because it's constantly evolving, and what is a CISO is evolving and adapting because of those risks and because of the need to speak the language of the business. So I feel like it's about measurability, transparency, and alignment from CISOs to the board and back.
Fantastic. And of course, there are so many tech trends evolving in real time and even converging in many cases. And there's a real pressure on every single one of us to be in a state of almost continuous learning to keep up to speed with that. So I've got to ask, as someone right in the heart of this space, How or where do you self-educate to keep on top of everything?
I mean, there's so much, right? I have probably 4 browser windows with 80 tabs each.
Yeah.
Right. I always say my OCD keeps my ADHD in check and vice versa, but not with that. I mean, because there's so much interesting things out there. So I feel like a big part of that is my peers and my community. I'm in Boston. We've got a great network of folks that when you get together at events, I call it cocktail hour consulting, right? Like you might not talk about it on a Zoom call, but when you've a friend or somebody that you've known in the industry for a while, hey, how are you solving this problem? Or, hey, I just had this really bad thing happen. What would you do about it? That to me is where a lot of the real learning happens. And then because it's experiential, right? And I also am a professor at a university that has experiential and co-op learning. So I bring that in as well. It's what are the learning outcomes? How am I going to focus on what the most important things are and get those in, because there's so much other stuff to learn. So I'd say community, it's blog posts and just rolling up your sleeves and trying stuff out. And that's lots of folks now, like again, FAIR or other sites have demo things that you can start to learn these skills and webinars. There's so much great content out there, and I'm a fan of actually watching webinars after they're gone because I can do it at 2x speed, right? The chipmunk mode, because my brain wants to process that information a lot faster.
Fantastic. Well, I absolutely love chatting with you today. But before I do let you go, for anyone listening, wanting to find out more information about anything that we talked about today, and equally find out more about Mimecast, the work that you're doing, and contact your team, etc., where would you like to point everyone listening?
Mimecast.com, right? I mean, we've been in business for over 20 years. We've got 40,000 customers, and we are a fundamental piece of your technology stack that insurance firms are going to look for, that your leadership's going to look for, because if you don't have these type of controls, it's going to cost you. So so Mimecast.com, or just reach out to me directly. I'm happy to speak.
Well, I think now more than ever, corporate boards need to be up to speed with their organization's potential cyber risks. I think that's everything that we all get now. And it's critical that boards collaborate to better understand that connection between risk and cyber risk. So I cannot thank you enough for exploring that connection and the C-suites and your recommendations for communicating risk, including things like avoiding jargon, linking cyber threats to business outcomes, aligning cyber risk with the overall business risk, and avoiding turning every incident into a crisis. So much gold in our conversation. And I've also got a new phrase, nerd knobs, I'm going to be taking from you. But thank you for joining me today.
Neil, I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
So a huge thank you to Neil for joining me today. I think we touched on a plethora of topics, didn't we? From the crucial role of the CISO in communicating cyber risk to corporate boards, and how to align these threats with business outcomes. And for me, I think Neil highlighted the critical need for a shift in focus and how a cyber attack happened, why it happened, and how this can enable a better understanding of these threats at the board level. And that advice on aligning cyber risk with overall business risk, creating built-in cybersecurity functionality, and being tactical when framing cyber risk has given me, for sure, invaluable insights. And I hope it has to you too. And if you've got anything that you would like to talk about that critical connection between cyber and business risk, anything that you think might help everyone listening develop a more informed strategic approach to their cybersecurity, please email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilC.Hughes. But that's it for today. So a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.